Good evening, everyone. And I'm Ashwin, as he just, introduced just now. So anyway, I'm just going to give you a run through, especially the emerging economies, Southeast Asia, even some parts of, some other parts in globally. So what does happen, and how is it easy, and how difficult is it to transform or transient from an environment whereby you have fossil fuels and so on, and towards renewable? Yes, everybody wants, they're all advocating for clean energy, but sometimes, clean energy is expensive. And I'll be just walking you through this entire process. And so you could get to feel how it is. And why do I mention that, sometimes how do you regulate sustainability? One side, one side you want sustainability, the other side that, you have so much of obstacles to overcome. And are we really keeping in track with time that we are? So without further ado, I'll just move on. I'm not going to be talking as a company. I'm just going to be talking as a citizen, or just a stakeholder in the planet. And here, obviously, this is just a rough. I'm from Malaysia, and I work for an IPB. That's basically it. And we do, of course, various other projects. But here, what I'm going to focus is two things where I'll be coming towards more on what do you call that, waste, and also the energy portion. And it goes back to the 17 goals that SDG trade. Okay, so basically just giving you a very head start here. Sustainable, well, it is a lot, we use that word quite a lot. Even in Asia, recently in the last year, I think every other person is interjecting that just that word. And nevertheless, whether they know the full meaning of it or what they mean by, in their terms, nonetheless, what has happened is basically, we could see, especially in Asia, where I come from. And you can start looking at the transition of on the energy market, and also on other regulations. There was a lot of advocacy for clean energy, emission reductions, and so on. No doubt that we are not, Malaysia is the country level, they are not wholly industrialized. Agricultural is still one of the big part, but industry, and then you have the IT sector, then you have the service sector. We are looking into more or less like we are not contributing so much as the other big giants. Nevertheless, it is still part of a big cluster of countries. When you take Indonesia, Thailand, so we are a Southeast Asian nation. Hence, it was trickled down all the way to from UN all the way to ASEAN. That's how we came about. Now, emerging economies are one of the most hot topics, especially, and it's been looked at very closely by a lot of regulators, global regulators, or in the sense of governance. But over here, when it comes to the transition from one phase to another, I think we are in a bit. We have not accepted the paradigm shift that's happening in certain ways. Now, let me explain that in a bit more manner that you understand. Now, I'm not saying regulation is not, is bad or good. That's what fits the purpose. It is very as important as any other rules and or laws in the system. It is with regulations you do get its benefits as well. When it comes to safe operating certain items safely. Projects are done within that regulations. They usually have less waste resources, and the waste are handled properly as well. So just to give you an example, now the next step would be, we have to just do a fact check. Okay, it has been since the 80s and 90s where, especially the 80s, it was really going into industrialization. 70s and 60s, predominantly this entire region, still mostly on agriculture. So palm oil, rubber, vice versa, tin mining. So that was the key industries. Then of course, industrialization, you had rapid mass growth. And the other contributor is obviously the natural gas environment. So we had entire country was really stable because of the piped-in natural gas, and we have abundance of it. Now, same with electricity coming into the electricity world. So we have the utility sectors, we have the independent companies, we have now emerging smaller players where they see concession business, or whether it's waste or energy, either way, it's a recurring business, and it's one of the most bankable businesses, business practice which we have. So now, obviously, I'm not going to explain too much. The photos that you see on the left-hand side of the presentation, is self-explanatory. Yes, I mean, we just wanted to make sure that it's more of a advocacy for animals as well. We have a lot of animals, and the wildlife is been suffering. I mean, has been suffering for amount of years now. I mean, and now we have taken to, not just in this region, but I think globally, it's one of the most saddest thing that it's going on extinct. So eventually, we can't tell our kids, hey, look, I mean, this was this animal was there before during my time, but unfortunately, somehow we killed it. So what I'm trying to say is kind of just keep it in the back burner as we go along. It's just to give you a brief example of. So now, something really transpired in the last year, which is the pandemic, and it's kind of I know everybody is saying that it's a wake-up call, but now I'm going to explain how this wake-up call actually came into a bit more. It took a bit more perspective than what we normally see. It has brought a lot of impacts in a lot of different parts of the businesses. At the same time, we saw a boom in parts of the business whereby it's never expected. It was a commodity. Well, commodity is more of a like food and so on. It's been always a good industry per se, because you need food. It's the entire circular economy of food. I mean, whereby what do you do with the waste or waste food? Do you produce something? Vice versa. But giving you a simple example, even contact lens business have tripled and quadrupled. Reason is when you wear a mask with your glasses, it starts fogging up, and these companies who are manufacturing contact lenses have been expanding their businesses like twofold. So just to give you a quick example, they are winners and also losers in this game. Okay, when it comes to the gross GDP, we do see at least about 20% have been contributed by the unincorporated industry. These are in Asia is kind of famous. I think in some parts, China as well, Indonesia, you see the street vendors, street peddlers, looking into from any commodities. So these are the unincorporated businesses, compared to the corporate sectors that I come from. So you see that it's been shifting, and yet some have not been they have not accepted the terms yet. So it is reflecting a bit more on their purpose, and whether they want to look into profits alone, or they want to just contribute back to this, whether the society or the planet. I mean, that's a topic for another day. What I'm trying to say is about time. I mean, it's a lot of businesses are now rethinking their strategy. I mean, Dan mentioned a lot of things which are very informative just now. One of them is ESGs. Where do we go from? Yes, it brings a lot of opportunities, but at the same time, if you don't execute it properly, yes, you can end up in a big of a mess. So now, the questions that I have on that particular side is, now after the pandemic, should there be some sort of like a metrics that you can gauge upon, and how can you say that in environments, when you start looking into a lateral economy, you start manufacturing and throwing, manufacturing and throwing. Coming back to food, yes, you eat the food, but the biggest problem with the Asian economy here, the waste here, is we intend to pack our foods in plastics and then we throw the plastics as well. So this is something that has been, I mean, it's a quagmire you can't escape. So now let's look into where do we go from, what do we do with this, and how we started looking into waste to energy coming up. Basically, there are two factors in any emerging markets. We're looking at obviously waste, of course, energy, like I mentioned. Now, these factors you got coming to us here. This is actually a real site in Asia. I will not mention, but I put this together with the help of a friend, Paul. He is a consultant for renewable energy and also for waste, and part of it, the credit goes to him. So on this scale, what we are going to discuss is what happens, let's say, if we want to go in for a waste to energy project with most of the emerging economy. Now, mind you, because most of the emerging economies are still kind of regulated. There's a reason for it, of course, because they are the country themselves are rather new, after post-independence, and some of them have actually taken up a law which has worked somewhere and then implemented it during independence and vice versa. So, and we kind of stuck with it. So what I'm trying to just summarize there, a lot of these regulatory things have been there, but it has not been evolved. Technology does evolve, requirements evolve, but somewhat regulations are still the same. So there's a bit of a huge gap that we feel that, as whether you are a developer, whether you are an off-taker, or whether you're just a stakeholder or a citizen, you do get affected by this entire. The few factors, this empowers, obviously technology I mentioned, environmental laws. Then of course you have the increasing demand for energy. So we are trying to make clean energy, and trying to, yes, there was a big leap. We do own several gigawatts of hydro in the region. But then again, if it's really clean energy or not, it's another perspective altogether. Nevertheless, you have solar, you have various other means of producing energy. The fact is, you have a baseload energy, and then you have your intermittent energy. Yes, is it sustainable? That's another question altogether. We look at some might say solar is sustainable, but in a nutshell, it's going to be the transition from fossil fuels to clean energy takes more than two hands to clap. So hence, now we look at this process coming a bit more into it. This is how we're looking into so basically we summarize this entire thing into a simple matrix. Now, you have let's talk about waste. Waste itself, now, the biggest problem is, you have the feedstock. Then, first of all, as you go for a waste to energy or waste to biogas, biofuel, there's various aspects that you can create from waste. So you start looking into the project viability. First of all, is the feedstock. If you don't have the feedstock, you can't produce. So if you can't produce, you can't sell. Then you have the policy regulations. Now the next is obviously your culture, your social cultures. I'll be touching a bit more of NIMBY syndrome, basically. Then you have the segregation of disposal, which is usually the biggest issue that we have in this particular region. When they started this a few years ago back in Europe, a few decades ago, they had similar issues, and until they started, remapping the entire process of how do you distribute the waste. Then, of course, finally, you have the economic and financial. So when we take a bit of a look, each of this matrix, each of these points has its own challenges. The feedstock is the worst. Mostly it's overestimated. Now, so you can't really look into a feedstock of municipal solid waste or anything. You can't come and say that, okay, I can produce 5 kilowatts or something, or 5 kilowatt hour from this thing. So you can't add a calorific value. Now, what do you call it? The issues are left to address during concession agreements. But at the end, you may end up sizing your mechanical items, and it basically opens up for failures eventually. Now you go into policies. Well, the issue is I think the waste to energy scenario in Asia, lacks a clear policy. We do have an environmental policy, but we have an energy policy. But then again, when it comes to both of this, okay, on a process scale, something is lacking. So now this is where, and I mentioned how do you regulate sustainability. At the same time, now we need to spell out the price. Okay, so the tipping fees is one of the killers that we feel. If you also have a waste landfill site, which is much more further than your plant, that's going to increase the cost. Because regulators, they buy it at a tariff that they negotiate the tariff, and you have to maintain the tariff up to your end of your agreement. So many of the independent power producers, and even the small power producers, which is becoming much more apprehensive now due to these issues. So they are feeling a lot of the pinch. What happens to these projects after being awarded? Most of them will not take off. Some of them will not go into financial close. Some may take off, but then would not be able to commission the plant up to commercial operation. Then you have your social culture. I won't touch too much on this. I'm just going to speed up from here and go into a bit more in detail. Something a bit more interesting from here on. Now, the risk is basically clear. We have the socio-cultural issues whereby, when I mentioned, not in my backyard. So nobody wants waste in, anywhere nearby where they live. I think this is this NIMBY syndrome is a global syndrome that we are facing. Okay, so here on, then let's move into the energy portions that the other part of the renewable energy that we have. So second, right. Now, this is kind of concession market, as I mentioned, is one of the most, I would say, lucrative. I wouldn't say lucrative at this point in time, depending on where you are in this region. To give you an example, tariff-based, like Asia, for us, is 10 US cents for waste to energy. Whereas in Japan, in the US, is 40 cents. So there is incentives in those regions, whereby here it's like, we wanted to get the cheapest power. It's obvious. At the end of the day, you are running a business, and the business has to be sustainable. So hence, these regulations needs to do a bit of deeper dive and go into the, and go and address the real issues rather than just, be there for the sake of, as a guidance. Now, in a regulated or non-regulated, every market has its own stresses. Off-takers, you have the off-takers, and of course you have the generators. Now the off-takers are usually large state-owned companies who has been there for 30 to 40 years, probably since inception, probably maybe privatized later on or reprivatized, or they do various types of corporate restructuring. Off-takers, of course, the advantage they have, they own the infrastructure. So you may not, you may be able to produce energy, but then you won't have a transmission to, to sell it. So because of this kind of issue, the transition to go into clean energy, it's kind of naturally delayed, because first, you don't give importance to technology. Now, there are technology, there is a demand, and when there is demand and the technology, you can create a bit of, you can create competitiveness. For instance, yes, now everybody is looking into solar. Obviously, the leverage cost of electricity is, is getting really competitive. But at the same time, is it sustainable? Or, there's a whole lot of questions opening up. What are you going to do with the panels after 25 years or 30 years of service life? We just started solar maybe 15 years ago. I mean, not we means globally, I mean, on large scale production and also large scale solar farms. So we still have another 20 years, probably another 15 years to go until we start disposing of the first solar farms. So, it's a thing that we learn along the way. Coming towards the small time or, generators, energy producers. Well, they have always been seen as a new kid on the block, and usually sometimes they feel. Now, it is never a level playing field. Concession business, has been a game by usually the GLCs, the government-linked companies. I mean, they are big, and they have the muscle to actually go through this entire process up to financial close and getting into commercially operate. Whether it's a plant, whether it's going to be a waste management business, let it be whatever. So it is a monolithic market. So in the next step, you're going to see the when I mentioned SMEs, and some of them has vested interest. All right. So when I mentioned the SMEs, it's an idiom that I usually say. They are a small fish in a small pond surrounded by big fishes. So that basically gives you need to maneuver in such a way with speed, agility at the same time to and work 3 or 4 times harder to get where the other fishes are. That gives you a kind of a perspective of how things move in emerging markets. Yes, vested interest, I think that is a no-brainer. It's not a bad thing when I say vested interest, but it sometimes is it's good for the human and business, but most of the time it ends up being not so good for the environment. So the process is another biggest obstacle that a lot of people. Why make something good so difficult? Which is a simple question that a lot of people ask. You want to start putting perhaps solar panels putting solar panels in the house, or even going into mini hydro business. It becomes such there's so many stumbling blocks, and by the time you get your award, you just lose the momentum and rethink about, am I going to do the right thing? So when we start looking into small businesses this way, it's not going to be a good thing in the long run for the economy. Now, this small business, they contribute pretty well to the economy, compared to you have big businesses, of course, the complex, they're complex like a Swiss watch, inside. So they move in their own direction, in their ways. It's like a trade wind. But with the smaller business, they are fast, they're churning out much quicker because they have an agile business model, obviously. I think that is the point what I'm making here. You need a lot more of these smaller companies in order to get getting more foreign investment coming into the country, thus helping it to them. So from this sustainability, I'm coming towards the end here. Okay, how do we change this? How do we move forward with this? How do we go into regulate sustainability? Giving you some examples, the first thing we need to do, to transit, basically the examples on sustainability is transition to clean energy. I think that is the first thing. We can talk about it till cars come home, but at the end, it is going towards that. The technology matters, whether it's going to be nuclear, like what Dan said. I mean, it's going to be, we need to wait and see. It all depends on the shift, that paradigm shift is going to happen. You can advocate for whatever items you want, but whether it's going to be, making business sense or not, that's the difference. You have to shift out pollution from the transport. Yes, power is one of the major contributors, but transport is the key supply chain. That puzzle on the emission perspective. Now, if we could shift that from the transport, that's going to be the game changer, because that takes a huge. That's going to be the hardest to change, but that's going to give you the best benefit in terms of decarbonization, global decarbonization. chemical-free food and water, yes, of course, I'm not going to be touching too deep into that. I think, explains all. We want to avoid landfill as much as yes, we have no choice but try to reduce the amount of landfill. So that we have. Amount of landfills creates enough methane. I mean, that's, if we go to the EPA website, and sometimes we have a we don't know how we are surviving actually. So it's kind of a dilemma that we all face. We don't understand. I mean, some of us don't understand. Sometimes we understand that we just shut our eyes. But this is something that we need to ask: where do we go for? Can we do away without having this landfills and so on? At times we fail to look back from history because, well, predominantly Asians here, as I can see, I'm sure globally as well, we have always been practicing circular economy, and we give back to the earth. But somewhere in time, we wanted to start, being a bit more greedy, because circular is not, it's not profitable. So that is the problem that we face. Being circular, you can't make the amount of profits that you make on a lateral. But this are changing. I mean, technology is coming up. The more technology comes up on converting this, you get businesses to go and really take a big step towards circular economy. And that is what will change. Now, on the other side, how can the lawmakers help, or the government? As I mentioned, circular economy. The second thing is advocate a bit more waste to energy. Not necessary to energy. I'm talking about biofuels. Use the biofuels for your dumper trucks. Those kind of things where we need to learn from. I think the matured economy like Europe and America. So they have a very yes, they have a good supply chain, but at the same time, they start, I mean, when it comes to waste, they start segregating their waste at the beginning of the supply of the line, I mean, from the line rather than to the end. And this is the biggest issue in this region, whereby we wait until, we let it do towards the end part. Because there's people's livelihood at stake towards the end, because that's a separate scheme altogether. Now, plastic to fuel is the other important thing that we really need to look into. And then, of course, you have your bio CNG and hydrogen from your agricultural residues. So, lastly, okay, when I talked about the paradigm shift, basically we need to change rapidly, okay, to basically upgrade our standards. Once we have that quality of life, or this is what everybody wants, we look up to certain countries because they have a quality of life. But at the same time, when it's available at your own place, you just tend to put your dump, we tend to take it for granted, to be honest. Then you have your licensing and all the, when it comes to regulatory, try to control their performance of it and look into more technology rather than just, rather than just licensing based. So if it's a performance-based control, you have a lot more avenue that, to adapt to the, basically the next cycle as it goes along. You have interagency and try to harmonize as much as possible. Come up with basically an authority or a small development, a small, advocate to push for within the government and say this is what we need to do, and so on and so forth. And the other thing is, of course, we need more pilot projects. A lot of people don't want to do pilot project because it costs money. B, you can't make money. So it comes back to square one. Now, how do we go about it? One of the other potential, without doing a pilot project, you have no reference and you don't understand, and eventually that somebody finds out a good way of doing this, it just goes to a waste. So this needs to be really looked at, and only the government or lawmakers can really make that happen. But it's not just them; it's also the as I said, it takes two or more hands to clap nowadays. I think the entire supply chain of the stakeholders needs to come up with a way of emphasizing those kind of points. Then, of course, what we lack, we need to start emphasizing more universities, especially on validating those technologies. Now, we do depend on the patterns and so on of Western, businesses. And for that matter of fact, they have spent a lot of energy, a lot of funds to develop something. Yes, we are paying for the what do you call it, IP rights for probably for the next 15 years and eventually, then we start complaining things are expensive. The most okay, coming towards the last point, we always want everything to be cheap sometimes. We want the best and to be cheap. I think we need to start realizing, we need to we are not living in an ideal world. We're living on a very realistic and practical world. If you want something good, we have to pay for it. Now, how do we start looking into transition towards clean energy? The biggest problem we all have, we don't realize this. How lucky most of the emerging economies are. We pay really, fossil fuel is basically subsidized. So if you want to move to the next step, take out the subsidy. That's what I always say. You remove the subsidy, you see this going super fast, and within no time they will start introducing new technology, introducing new regulations. They will start. You need a source, or you need the pain. Then you start looking into this. So without further ado, I end my presentation.